We can probably get started. I think we have a sizable group now.
I think we have a quorum. Okay. Well, good morning and good evening. I am Carlos Brosso. I'm calling you or Zooming you from Dallas as part of the P&G Alum chapter of the DFW, or we're starting the chapter here in DFW. And so we'll jump right into it. I want to do first just a quick icebreaker to make sure everybody is comfortable with Zoom. Now, I see a lot of cameras off, so we'll see how this works. But what I want to do is I'm going to ask everybody to turn their camera off. And then when you answer affirmatively to the next question, you will turn your camera back on. So looking for the cameras off. All right. Just a heads up, the last question will be a little bit of a trick one, but all right. So if you are currently in the US, turn your camera on. Okay, so we got a few people coming from the US, but I'm guessing we have a pretty international crowd. If you are calling from Europe, turn your camera on. You can keep your camera on if you already said yes. All right, what about Asia? And we'll throw in Australia with that, just for time zone simplicity. Latin America, South America, Mexico. All right, what am I forgetting? Do we have somebody in Antarctica?
Canada? We don't exactly belong to the
sorry, I should have said North America. Canada, thank you. Good catch. All right.
Okay, here I come.
Called me out on that one. Very good. Did I miss anything? Excellent. Well, again, welcome, whether you're calling in the evening, middle of the day, I guess for the Europeans, or in the morning for those from the US. So it's my pleasure to moderate the session for this morning. We have 1 hour. It's pretty action-packed. So I'm going to jump right into it. Let me just check if anybody has an issue not seeing the shared screen. We have a chat window as well. And if you put in the chat window that you're having an issue, my partner in crime, Ranu, will help be managing the session from his end. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. So here's the agenda. We already did the quick icebreaker. We'll do an introduction of the DFW chapter. That's the Dallas-Fort Worth chapter of the P&G Alum group. I'll share some of my thoughts about gender diversity, a few facts with a couple of polls, and I'm assuming Ranu's got the polling ready to go. And then for the feature part of this morning or evening, the introduction to our guest speaker, Anthony Rose, who will talk about gender diversity and his personal experience. We'll have a little bit of time for a fireside chat, and we'll try to leave some time for some Q&A. So without further ado, let's go into it. So this is the board. Ranu Gupta is the board chair, and then you've got Roberta Duque, Bernardo Mesa, Alan Snyder, and myself. And so we just started the board probably a few weeks before COVID sort of hit the fan. So our first in-person get-together has yet to happen. So in the meantime, we thought, well, let's at least take advantage of the very helpful national chapter of the P&G Alum Association and start sponsoring some discussion series. And so this is actually the second one in our series, and we're looking forward to having a few more in the coming months, and are really looking forward to when we can go back in person whenever this thing gets under control, whether it's a vaccine or it just dies out on our own. But in the meantime, thank goodness for Zoom.
Yeah, it'll happen soon, Carlos.
We're all waiting, trust me. All right, so Ranu, do you have the polling ready to go?
Yes, here we go.
Okay, so just, nope, that's the wrong one.
Okay, sorry.
There we go. All right, so here's a couple questions to get us started. Thinking about gender diversity, which country of these 5 has the highest percent of women in directorship roles? And these are in alphabetical order, except for some reason I couldn't remember which came first, G or F, I guess. Okay, we have 88% of you so far voted. That's more than voted in the U.S. election. So I think we got a tie. And Ranu, I don't know if people can see those results. There you go. Okay, so you need to, I guess, share the results. All right, interesting. So people would put Germany and Australia up ahead. UK, I guess they're not believing in the Brits there. France pretty low and the US pretty high. Well, the two of you who chose France are correct. So here is women's global representation on boards, and you'll get a copy of this after the session, but you can see France is actually the highest with 44% representation on their boards. And of those 5 countries, the US is way down with 26%. Although they've been improving, they're still pretty far down. So I think you read about it, you hear a lot of press. I hear people on some of the National Association of Corporate Director meetings that I go to talk about all these women that are getting on boards in the US. But as you can see, we still have a long way to go, even to catch up with some of our developed country partners. In fact, the US is low on all these, except maybe for Japan and India. Okay, let's go to the next question. If you can go ahead and put that up, Ranu. Many of you may have heard this stat that there are more men named John in CEO roles in the US than women, which in and of itself is kind of a sort of a shocking factoid. Now, if we add to the name John, the names James, Robert, and William, so if you think of those 4 men's names, what is the ratio of men with these names compared to women in CEO roles in the US? I guess my takeaway from this, Ranu, is I probably should have changed my name to Robert or William or James or John, but stuck with Carlos, I guess. Okay.
Can you see the results?
Yes. So we're done? Okay. So, well, it's not quite as bad as 5-1, but you're pretty close. The answer is 4-1. So take a look at this. The role ratio of men named James, Robert, John, or William to the number of women in chief executive roles is 4-1. Close behind are Senate Republicans. House is doing a little bit better. And then you get down to professors of economics and corporate boards, and then all the way down to the US population. So compare the number of men with those first names as a percent of the population compared to women, and then look at the ratio on CEOs. So I'll let you make your own conclusions of that, or maybe we'll save that for the Q&A. All right. And then, as you can see, there has been some progress in the United States. So even though we come up low on that list from the previous question, there are no more all-male boards on the S&P 500, which is actually a big improvement from just a few years ago. And then you can see the rest of the stats there. So there is some improvement, but a long ways to go, as you can see, before you get to certainly 50%, let alone in the same league as some of our European partners. And we'll have that for you as well. So in the interest of time, I will keep on moving. Let's go back to the agenda. So first, I'm just going to share a couple of my stories, and then we'll go to our guest speaker. So I am also a P&G alum. I started in 1980 in the coffee division, back when Procter & Gamble owned the coffee business, and then got to go into the paper goods business and spent a good bit of my career internationally, living in Europe, but then having responsibility for global technology in the R&D division. And one of the things that struck me early on when it came to gender diversity was the fact that we were able to be very competitive in Japan going back to the 80s and 90s in the paper goods, even though there were some extremely strong companies, Unicharm for one. And the reason was they weren't hiring women. And from the get-go, Procter & Gamble didn't have that issue. So we literally got the cream of the crop of the talented female scientists and engineers and gave us a huge talent advantage and ultimately an innovation advantage that led to a booming success in the paper goods division back in the 80s and 90s. Where just as an example, with some of the technology coming out of the Japan organization, we were able to improve the diapers, for example, in Europe and triple our share in a matter of a couple of years. We were just printing money during the late 80s. So that's one thing. Fast forward a few years, and in 2013, I joined the Campbell Soup Company to run their global R&D division, working directly for the CEO, Denise Morrison. In fact, the main reason I joined Campbell's was because I really admired what she was bringing to the game and the opportunity to work with her and really reorganize and transform the innovation agenda for Campbell Soup. So I traveled quite a bit with Denise, and she was a very good sport when it came to some of the things that she had to endure. But one particular moment that sticks out in my mind is we were in Bakersfield, California, visiting our Bolthouse operation, checking into the hotel. She did travel with a security guard constantly. And we go to the front desk, and right away, the clerk, and this is, believe me, this is the nicest hotel in Bakersfield, turns right to the security guard and said, "Mr. Morrison, how can I help you?" Assuming, of course, that he was the CEO and not Denise Morrison, who actually was pretty well known and for having her and her sister at the time, the only sister CEOs of Fortune 100 companies at the time. And she just laughed it off. But I had to think, how many times has she endured that kind of a scenario? And I talked to her about that, and she said all the time. And she doesn't. She just said, you can't dwell on it, but it is still a reminder of just the assumptions that people make when it comes to gender diversity, even with a well-known CEO in a high-profile role. Okay, so without further ado, we're going to get to the highlight of the presentation, and I'm going to turn it over to Anthony Rose. He's the founder, chairman, and CEO of the House of Rose, a Singapore-based talent training and transformation consultancy. But before he started that in 2014, he served in senior leadership roles in communications and influencer marketing positions across Asia and North America with small companies like Walmart, Procter & Gamble, GlaxoSmithKline, all since 1991. So he brings a wealth of corporate experience as well as consulting with some of the major companies. And he's very passionate about this subject based on a lot of his own personal experience. So without further ado, Anthony, I'm going to stop my share screen and turn it over to you.
Carlos, before Anthony starts, I just wanted to mention that I've known Anthony for 25 years. And his journey has been remarkable. 5 years ago, when he had just left Walmart and we had connected, he had shared with me this whole vision of his with Break the Ceiling, Touch the Sky, the gender diversity movement that he founded. And he told me about his plan to write 5 books, launch all these. This movement, if you will, and these 16 global conferences. And I was supportive, but in my mind I was skeptical. But here we are today, and Anthony has far exceeded whatever he had taken on and put in. So he's a remarkable person. And so thank you so much for accepting our invitation, Anthony, to speak to this group. So and thank you for joining all the way from Singapore.
Thank you.
Over to you. Thank you for allowing me the interlude, Carlos. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Ranu, and thank you, Carlos. Ranu, let me start by saying that I'm a very ordinary person. And this is, I guess, fundamental to what we've been able to achieve with Break the Ceiling, Touch the Sky. So let me share my screen and let us get started. So I have a very, very simple thought for all of us on the call today. Do we fundamentally believe that a single noble thought inspired by someone we love can change the world? If you believe that, raise your hands. You don't need to do anything else. Just raise your hands and let's see if you believe that.
I just wanted to also, Unita, I just wanted to also add that what you just said resonated so much with me because of what Kamala Harris said yesterday at the Democratic National Convention. What she said was that it was her mother that has, kind of propelled her or taken her to where she is today. So I just wanted to make that comment because it just hit when you made this particular statement.
Thank you, Nita. And for our participants, that's my first boss speaking. So
I don't know who's the boss today.
Was my manager in 1991. My God, Unita, that seems a long time ago. And he tagged along this young kid who was always, travel sick in the transport in Bombay. And thank you, Nita, for all you did for me. But I want to talk about a truly extraordinary person. I want to talk about my mother. And for me, life was quite simple. And in 2012, one evening while I was at Walmart, I got a call from my home in Mumbai. And the call was very simple. The call said, "Mom has had a stroke. You need to get home now." I jumped on the flight and reached Mumbai and realized that I had very little time left with my mom. My mom had Alzheimer's, and we could see that the end was coming, but it is never easy to accept. So I was sitting there with her in those few weeks or months before her passing. And one day I bent down and whispered in her ear. And for the first time in, I guess, 42 years, it was the first time I had told my mother that I love you. And I will make sure that you are not forgotten. And so that started my tryst with gender diversity. After that whisper happened, I was wondering what could I do to honor my mom and honor all the women who work so hard, all the mothers who work so hard to see their children through school, university, and so on and so forth. My mom was a housewife, but she ran a fairly successful business out of home for over 35 years. And what she taught me could never be replaced: her work ethic, her determination, her courage. And she was not educated. She had no access to leadership training. And so I decided I would unlock what it was that successful women all over the world were doing to succeed. And that's where the idea of my book, Break the Ceiling, Touch the Sky, started in 2012. Alongside my job in the day, managing a team of 350 corporate affairs leaders from around the region, at night I was busy on the book, creating concepts. And one day I reached out to one of my friends and asked him for help. Now, this is very important in the journey, the decision to ask for help. I reached out to a person called Tim Love. Many of you might have heard of Tim Love. He worked on the P&G advertising campaigns for many years. And I was so shocked the next morning when I woke up. I had in my inbox 45 introduction notes from Tim Love to powerful, inspirational women from all over the world. Over the next several weeks, I chased down each of those connections, and I entered 2013 with, I guess, 100 connections, 100 people who I started with. That 100, as I began to research the book, grew to 1,000, and very soon, in the first year itself, I had close to 3,000 contacts working or related to the Break the Ceiling, Touch the Sky book. We finally narrowed down to 54 interviews and 43 women, inspirational women from all over the world, whether it's Kiran Shaw Mazumdar from Biocon, or women in Japan, Australia, India, China, the US, Canada, are all in the book. These women allowed me to get into their minds and tell their stories. And finally, in 2014, Break the Ceiling, Touch the Sky was launched. But this was also a year of change for me, because in this year of the book coming out, a week after the book came out, I realized that there would be a major revamp at Walmart. And I had a decision to make, whether to move with Walmart to another country or whether I wanted to start something on my own. I decided to do something on my own, and that's how House of Rose Professional was born. And therefore, came back to Singapore, started the company, and over the next few months, I did over 40 book sessions at companies around the region, China, India, Singapore, and around the region. Each of these sessions were with anywhere between 30 to 200 women leaders. And slowly, we began to get critical mass to the work that we were doing. I had also committed, in honor of my mother, that 100% of the royalties from Break the Ceiling, Touch the Sky would go to Save the Children, to help underprivileged women in India. We adopted a cause. 25,000 women would receive medical tests from the royalties from the book. And the work continued. After doing 40 such sessions, I realized that it was becoming unbelievably difficult to continue at that pace and in those small sizes. And I was really struggling and seeking for solution. And then the universe answered my call and provided me a solution. God sent me an angel. So that angel you see there is my wife today. But we met in 2015 at our favorite salsa place. And this beautiful lady walked up to me, poked me in the arm and said, "You look fit, but can you dance?" I said, "We'll see." And fortunately for her and for me, we both can dance. So that was how we met. And that's how the next phase of Break the Ceiling, Touch the Sky started. 2 months later, I woke my beautiful wife up one morning and said to her, "Delia, I've had this vision, and in that vision, I've decided that we will convert the book into a conference." The first conference happened in Singapore. We had 425 people from 32 countries attend the first conference. The conference was a huge success. From out of nowhere, really, the conference exploded onto the scene. And the most amazing thing was, which I'm going against the grain today, I had 3 simple rules. Rule number 1, there would be no PowerPoint in the conference, which meant that anyone who was not really well prepared and didn't have a story from the heart would not be able to get on stage. Rule number 2, my speaker set had to be 50-50 male and female. equally diverse. And rule number 3, we would not close our doors to any woman from anywhere in the world who couldn't afford the delegate fee but wanted to attend the summit. And with those 3 principles, the conference simply exploded. I mean, overnight, we decided that we would then expand internationally. In 2016, we went to India, and one of the big success elements of the Break the Ceiling, Touch the Sky story is my telephone and my pen and paper. I think I've probably made more than 100,000 calls in the last 6 years for the conference and for the movement. And I guess at that point, approximately 20,000 people had said no to many of the plans that we had, equally as many people said yes to the plans that we had. Taking it to India was a strategic move. India is a tough market. It's very cost competitive. There are a lot of conferences, but Indians, as we all know, are extremely good at word of mouth. And overnight, the buzz on the conference began to grow. Alongside, we began to continue our donations to Save the Children and continue to see the benefit from that cause. In 2017, we decided that we did not want to be the big fish in the small pond, which was Singapore. And we decided that we would continue to expand, continue to go out of Singapore and go to more and more countries and expand the Break the Ceiling, Touch the Sky message. Around this time, I also had the harsh realization that we could not survive as just a conference company. We would need to provide adjacencies. We would need to provide consulting, do more of the consulting work. And in 2017, I decided to write another book. Now, this book was planned 2 years in advance for us to be able to enter another vertical, which is basically the placement of senior female leadership talent into the top roles. A year in advance, that vision was laid out. 6 months later, the book came out, and so was born Dream Job, my third so far, Unita, in the Ranu, in the promise which I made you. And every time we faced a challenge, and the devil whispered in my ear that you can't withstand the storm, I simply told the devil back, I'm not the storm, but I do have a tornado in my corner. That's the pet name for my beautiful wife. I call her the tornado because anything that gets in our way, she would necessarily find a way to get through it. So in 2017, the highlight was expansion and marriage to my beloved tornado. In 2018, by then, we were up to close to 35,000 contacts. And amongst these 35,000 contacts, a number of them that we curated were men. And why men? All of the conferences, all of the movements that I've seen in many parts of the world continue to have women speaking to women. And this is fantastic. We should have all of this and more. But we were quite clear right from the beginning that this was not a women to women only forum. This was a we forum where women and men came together and worked together for diversity solutions. And then we decided to enter the Middle East. Why the Middle East? The Middle East was a very illogical choice. There were no sponsors, there were no supporters. In the top 100 CEOs in the Middle East, only one woman was leading as CEO. So 99 male CEOs, far worse than any other region in the world. And I realized how much of a difference one good man can make, or more than one good man can make. And the one good man that we picked in the Middle East was James Michael Lafferty, Some of you may know Jim, as we fondly call him. Jim was our key ally in the Middle East, and we decided that with his support and with his brand support, and also with Procter & Gamble support, we managed to get into the Middle East. The same year, we expanded the franchise to include a Global Leadership Awards. The Global Leadership Awards gave us the credibility and the breadth of penetration with many, many more companies. Over 182 company entries came in that year for the Leone Awards, which were judged by a team of 40 independent international jury members, with the results being available for anybody who wanted to see them at the award itself. In 2019, we took the summit to North America, thanks to great companies like PepsiCo and Coca-Cola, again, that helped us get into the region just as they had helped us around the world, and also Kroger out there helping us in the US. It was a wonderful time. I also had the opportunity to involve great friends like Ranu, who you see here chairing this session today, and our very own former chairman, Bob McDonald, who did a fabulous keynote, and my very dear friend, Chester Twigg, who also has flown around the world to compare the summit, at least I think 10 of the 18 or 19 summits we've had so far. By then, our group had spread to around 45,000 connections. We were on 4 continents and couldn't wait to get into Europe. We continue to grow globally. Great companies like Walmart helped us in India to expand our influence there, and it was really a fantastic year. And then came cruel COVID. After having a wonderful year in 2019, COVID came along in 2020 and completely wrecked all of our carefully laid plans. So on the 20th of February, we did our USA edition of the conference, and we were in New York till the 26th, and 4th of March, everything shut down, and we just about got out of the country and got back to Singapore. But for us, the shock that COVID gave us also gave me time to reflect. We revamped many things and retooled many things on Break the Ceiling, Touch the Sky, and on our business. It forced us to think out of the box. And over the next 3 to 4 weeks of thinking, we finally came out with our, I would say, a game-changing plan for the next 10 years. Our plan is very, very simple. Most of the time, people talk about the Fortune 500. The Fortune 500 is very powerful, no doubt about it. But there is one element that people seem to miss. The Fortune 500 really reflects mostly American companies. There is another entity called the Fortune Global 500, which is 3 times as powerful, which includes 34 countries, which basically contribute 1/3 of the world's GDP. Now think about that. 500 companies control 1/3 of the world's GDP. And it was, for us, an aha moment. We decided that the reality is just too shockingly bad. So in the Fortune Global 500, there are only 14, today 15, thanks to one being added in the last 6 months, female CEOs. So 15 out of 500 CEOs only are female. Isn't that incredible? Do you ever hear the media talking about 15 out of 500? No. The media is fixated about talking about the Fortune 500, which is 36 or 37 out of 500. Completely different ball game. This year was the first year that China overtook the US in the Fortune Global 500. The world is changing so much. The world is changing so rapidly, and we all have to move along with the changes. So as we looked at this huge opportunity, we came up with a very, very simple plan, and we put a stake in the ground. People think I'm crazy. It's not crazy. It's not impossible. We can do it, but it's going to take 5,000 Anthonys, 5,000 Carlos, 5,000 Ranu, 5,000 Unita, 5,000 Raj, and all of the other people on this call. It's quite simple. Our stake in the ground is we are going to quintuple the number of female CEOs in the Fortune Global 500 in the next 10 years. Think of it for a minute. In the last 20 years, we've only got to 14. Now we are talking about quintupling the number of CEOs. We're going to go from 14 to 70 in the next 10 years. And we are going to double the number of male CEOs who advocate and pull for diversity and inclusion in the Fortune Global 500 in the same 10 years. Why double the male CEOs who advocate? Because men who occupy 97.2% of CEO seats in the world's most powerful 500 companies have to get involved. It's not enough to cut a cake on the 8th of March, run around the block and do a little sprint to celebrate women. We all have to be personally involved. So that's our dream. To enable this dream, we've first started with 20 global executives. You can see I've gently got some of our proctoids into this team, including our former chair. There's Jim, there's Bob, there's Chester, there's Max, and Ranu's on another set of things. He's also on the council. So these 20 leaders will start, and by the end of the next 3 months, we will bring on 100 leaders at this level to drive our movement forward.
Hey, Anthony.
That's like, yeah.
That's great. Thank you. I want to make sure we leave a little bit of time for some discussion and questions.
Carlos, last slide. That's it.
Okay.
I'm going to stop here. So to answer the question of can one person make a difference? Yes, that one person who was my mom inspired all of this. All of what you see today, all of what we're going to do was inspired by one person, Diony Rose. So thank you, Carlos, for the opportunity to share these thoughts, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Anthony. I'm going to just have a couple of questions for Anthony to get us going. And in the, if you have questions or comments for Anthony, feel free to put them into the chat room, and Ranu's going to be keeping track, and we'll leave some time to make sure we get to some of those questions as well. So I'm going to switch over to my screen. All right. So just a couple questions to get us going, Anthony. Thanks again. So certainly in the US, but I think it's resonated in most of the world, the Me Too movement, which started just before COVID hit in a big way. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on how the Me Too movement has impacted the discussion on gender diversity.
Carlos, it's been monumental. It's been monumental because of the freedom which it has enabled women to have to say what they mean and mean what they say. And it has brought so much into the open. It is interesting that we live in a society where the rules that apply to men are different from the rules that apply to women. Women are expected to dress in a certain way, behave in a certain way, speak in a certain way, and those certainly don't apply to men. But through all of this, in terms of the Me Too movement, I think the important thing is, where are we going with this? What are the individual actions that we can encourage both women to take and men to take, so that it becomes far more productive in terms of what happens moving forward, versus it becoming just about accusation and more accusation, or defense and defense. It is interesting to see that there's a lot of research to support that how a society treats its women is reflected in the way women in the workplace in that country or society are treated. So I have some very interesting interactions with men who sometimes object to other men being champions for gender diversity. Some of these clever men also, suggest that they don't necessarily understand the border line between what is acceptable behavior or what is harassment. And one of the simple tips that I give them, which is quite blunt, is, do you think that something is appropriate? What is appropriate? Would you do something of a certain behavior to a person you love, to your daughter, to your a person in your female member of your family that you care about? We all know what is right and wrong, what is acceptable and not acceptable. So really it comes down to individual behaviors. In terms of solutions that I feel are effective, Carlos, in the workplace when it comes to Me Too, some of the successes that we've seen with many companies are companies, one, in which principles, core values are well established. Two, the CEO of that company is advocate for a total zero tolerance policy on sexual harassment. Three, there is a working system and process by which people can report incidents. And four, some action has to be taken.
That makes a lot of sense. But let me build on that a little bit, Anthony, because you mentioned about different values, and we all know what would be right for women who we're close to, whether it's our daughter or a close friend or somebody in the family. But I think just about everybody on the Zoom call has had international experience, and we know that there are different norms and different cultures around the world. And I'm just wondering, how does that impact this discussion? Because what might be considered, clearly a wrong act in one country may by the culture not be considered that way. So how do we deal with that as we move around the world with our international businesses, and yet at the same time value gender equality as well as diversity in general?
Yeah. So, Carlos, great question. Unfortunately, there's no easy answer to that one. I guess it all comes down to, whether in a certain culture, what we see as gender diversity in the West is the same in that culture. So really, it comes down to the fundamental of how society views women. So if I were to take, for example, the Middle East as an example, there is a huge, I would say, discussion about gender diversity moving forward, having more women in leadership, having more better arrangements for women. But it is coming so very slowly. I don't think it's about wrong and right. I think it's about changing the social and cultural mindset and stubbornness which exists in certain countries or cultures, which will simply take more time to change. So we can see in some companies in the Middle East when people are trying to do different things, you know, in the companies, there is a tremendous amount of resistance. I mean, one example which came about recently was an example in which, you know, there was a sexual harassment complaint, and guess what happens when that complaint was investigated? The complaint was investigated by an entirely male team.
Mm.
So how do you deal with that? So the only way to deal with that is that the person at the top, the CEO or the top layer of managers and leaders, have to lead by example. They have to be on it on the time, and they have to demonstrate very clearly down the line what is acceptable or not acceptable in a particular corporate culture. And when you have that support from the top, things begin to change.
Mm.
Absolutely begin to change. And when you don't have it, it's never going to make a difference. It's going to be so incredibly slow.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And I got to say, one thing I am grateful to from my P&G experience is, you know, a lot of the strong values and ethics were ingrained into me at a very formidable part of my career. So I really appreciate that. And part of that was early days of P&G preaching and practicing tolerance, and at the same time respecting different cultures. So not an easy balance when you're traveling across the world and have to experience, but in the end, there are just some values that you won't compromise regardless. And if that means giving up business in a certain part of the world or losing business because you're not willing to make compromises, so be it. Anthony, I've got some more questions, but in the interest of time, I want to turn it over to the audience. I've seen a couple pop up in the chat window, and this is, I think, Renu, where you take over and ask the question for Anthony.
Happy to. And Carlos and Anthony, so thank you. There's several questions. I just wanted to mention that I think one of the things that's really been unique and effective, Anthony, for the work you've been doing is that you know, a lot of the gender diversity work focuses a lot on women, and rightfully so, but I think you have focused a lot on men because that's where the mindset change needs to happen. And that is great. You know, it's been this being part of this journey with you has been an eye opener for me as well. So fantastic work. On that note, I'm going to ask, so one of the questions Cheryl is asking is, and it's more a comment and observation, is that how can we involve more, you know, Black women in Break the Ceiling, Touch the Sky? And I wanted to mention that Cheryl, the last speaker that we had, I don't know if you were on this webinar, was Dr. Lisa Coleman, who's the former Chief Diversity Officer of Harvard University and current Chief Diversity Officer of New York University. She was actually a star speaker at Anthony's conference. In fact, I met her over there, and I was introduced to her through Anthony. So I just wanted to mention that. Did you have anything further on that, Cheryl, that you wanted to ask, or that was it?
Yeah, just basically what I said in the note is that, Anthony, I love what you've accomplished, and I love that it's in honor of your mom. I think that's so beautiful, and I especially love the philanthropic component. But as I did look at your visuals, I didn't notice a lot of women of African descent, and I'm wondering if you have perspective on why that is and what can be done to engage more Black women in what you're doing.
Yep. So a great question, Cheryl. So I think currently, after the developments of the last, I guess, few months, there's so much more awareness. And frankly, for us, I have to say, it was something that we really didn't watch too carefully. So we've had Black speakers in the past at our conferences, but in the last 8 weeks, what we've gone away and done is we've now got a list of the most powerful 200 Black speakers in the world. And again, Cheryl, to the point being that, you know, it doesn't matter what has been in the past. What matters for most people is to get onto something when their eyes open and to start taking action. So you'll be seeing for our event on November 11th and 12th, Singapore, which is World Edition, 1,000 participants. You'll be seeing a very strong black lineup at that forum. So I hope you will be able to join.
Great. Thank you, Anthony. Another question, this comes from RG. Recognizing that diversity needs to be a grassroots movement, what can frontline supervisors do to affect change? RG, do you want to elaborate on your initials? But the same as mine. So for a second, I thought I was asking questions of myself. But,
Hi, this is Rose. I did ask the question, Ranu, and that's really it. I think any feedback or any lessons that we could pass on to our frontline supervisors would really move the needle significantly.
Great.
Rose, can you define for me what you necessarily mean by frontline supervisors? I'm saying, I guess you're speaking of it in a North American context, because that might mean different things.
So it's not supervisors of supervisors, but supervisors of what in my company we call individual contributors.
Got it. Okay. So Rose, here's what I tell everyone who asks me, where do we start? So I keep telling folks that don't worry about the bigger picture. Just start with someone in your office or your community, because people want to know what to do. So a couple of things. First, you can read up about, the areas of diversity that you're interested in. Reach out to leaders who you believe have certain expertise in this thing. But if you really want to make a contribution and want to do something, just start with one person. Just start with improving the life of one single person, and that person will begin to pass that on, and very soon, that chain will begin to multiply. Multiplication is an amazing thing. When you pass on goodness, it just begins to explode. I would never have dreamt that we would be sitting where we are sitting today when I first whispered into the ears of my mom that I would make sure she was not forgotten. So really, just get started.
Very well said, Anthony. Thanks. That's powerful.
Thank you for asking that question, Rose. I'm gonna switch to another question. This is from Sekhar, who's also a colleague we worked with, both Anthony and I have worked with. So Shekhar is asking that, what about some of the pushback that has been seen for some of the initiatives, inclusion initiatives such as gender and LGBTQ, African Americans, Hispanics, and as a leader who has led some of these initiatives in the US for the Asian group, I sometimes got powerful pushback saying all need to be included, represented. So what are your thoughts there, Anthony?
I'm sorry, Ranu, I don't know if I understand the question. You're saying that
Anthony, maybe I can elaborate.
Yeah, go ahead,
sorry. No, some of these diversity and inclusion objectives were broken down, at least in P&G, by chapters. So I led the Asian Pacific American APALT chapter. In fact, I think Bob McDonald himself was the sponsor for that group and everything. So when I would go and ask for specific action to be taken, break down and give people goals for, hey, but in the next 3 years, we'd like to see the representation at by level go up to certain goals. Here are some suggested things. Would you like to be a mentor, and enroll senior leadership? Some of the senior leaders would push back, saying, I don't want to do anything specific for Asians, or I want all to be included and, our diversity. I mean, and recently you'd have seen with the whole Black Lives Matter movement, there was a lot of pushback saying all lives matter. Yeah. So on the one hand, it's of course every life matters. That's the whole point of inclusion. But on the other hand, washing over it, saying everything matters, so I'm not going to take any specific action, dilutes the specificity or an accountability that comes with, you know, clear and specific movements. I'd love your thoughts, because you've now been in this diversity and inclusion area, and you've been such an advocate. Remarkable journey. Kudos to you. I'd love to know how you've been handling, and I'm sure you've got a version of this pushback sometime. So what are the best ways to handle it, and what are your thoughts on the subject?
Shekhar, you know, I have a list. I call it the champs versus cheats list. For the last 8 years, I've put people on that list. People who talk about supporting diversity and inclusion, but really don't do anything about it. And then there are people who will always do something about it. So most of the time we find that statements like what you mentioned, all lives matter, and you know, the broad statements are really an excuse for not doing anything. That's the person's way of you know, telling you that this is not high enough on my agenda personally, and I'm not really going to do anything with it. But I'll hear you, and we'll have a nice conversation. And after that, that will be the end of the conversation.
Hey,
So,
Anthony, I think that's a great thought. I hate to interrupt you, but I know it's a great question, and I think you answered it really well. That's really just a cop out that some people use to not take responsibility, right? That, like Dr. Coleman mentioned as well last night. So I just wanted to mention that since we're on the top of the hour, I wanted to thank you very much and Carlos for managing this session so effectively. And a very important question I wanted to address, Karen, and that's a valid one, that where are women on our board? And the question is, where are the nominees? So would you, if you are in the DFW, any women leaders here in the DFW who would want to be on the board, we would love to have you on. So please email and do let me know if you'd like to be on this board. A lot of positive feedback in the chat, Anthony, that we're seeing. So thank you again so very much, both of you gentlemen, for doing a great job.
thank you, Ranu.
On behalf of the whole network, this is Helena Wong. Good to see you on the screen. I just want to thank you, and hope that you will also participate in helping building the Singapore chapter further.
Yes. Ranu and I have been talking about that now. So let's